Oops, excuse me. Sorry, folks. Hitting the wrong buttons here. All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another COS at Home webinar. My name is Jonathan Viod. I am your host, and thank you so much for joining us for this special edition COS at Home webinar. If you're tuning in for the battle cry, my apologies, but I have hijacked the time slot because today, Convention of States turns 10. That's right. On this day in 2013, Convention of States was officially born. So we decided to have a special COS at Home webinar to celebrate. And who better to celebrate this special anniversary than the two men that started it all, the Convention of States co-founders, Mark Meckler and Michael Farris. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you on this fine Sunday?
Excellent. Great.
Excellent.
Your co-host, Jonathan.
Here we go. Here comes O'Malley, as we were just talking about in the green room. All right, before we get started, for those of you who are new, I'd like to welcome you to Convention of States. If you're new and not familiar with COS and what we're all about, we are a grassroots movement focused on the goal of utilizing Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to call a Convention of States in order to propose amendments to the Constitution that would reduce the size and scope of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, and place term limits on all members of Congress and federal officials. In order to hold this convention, we need 34 states to pass our resolution. And to date, we have 19, kind of 20 states that have done so. We'll talk about that maybe. We're super happy to have you though tonight. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your Sunday evening to join us. Also, our team is in the background answering questions. So please feel free to drop them in the chat and ask away. But I will say we get a ton of questions, so we may not get to all of them. But what I would ask is, if you don't mind, keep it focused to Convention of States. Try not to get too crazy and too out there with questions, and we'll do everything we can to answer as many as we possibly can. The number one question that we do get, and I'll answer that right away, is this being recorded? And the answer is yes, it is being recorded. So don't worry, you will be able to get a copy of the recording after this ends. So if you have to duck out early, no problem at all. We will be sending you the recording. The last thing I want to do.
Is that the FBI or the NSA that's going to have that recording?
One or the other, I don't know. The last thing, though, that I want to do before we turn it over to these gentlemen is I want to encourage you all to check out our friends over at shopconventionofstates.com, as they've got a ton of new merch that is coming in. We're really excited about it. And one of those items is this limited edition special 10th anniversary tumbler. As you can see there, hot or cold drinks have never looked so good. So please go ahead and go on over to shopconventionofstates.com. You can pick up that limited edition 10th anniversary tumbler. And while we're talking about birthdays, tomorrow is my father-in-law's birthday. So a happy early birthday to Ralph. Yeah. Hope that you enjoy your day. And the last thing I'll say before we turn it over is we have our guests lined up for the September COS at Home webinar. So stay tuned to the end, and we will let you know exactly who that is. Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for being patient, and thank you so much for being here to celebrate the anniversary of Convention of States. But before we get into the birthday and talking about the origin and everything like that, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't first ask you to address the historic event that took place a week ago. That's the Convention of States Foundation's second simulated convention. And I know both of you were available to talk about it immediately afterwards, but I'm curious to know, now that you've had time to marinate and think about it a little bit more, how are you feeling about it? And Mark, why don't you go ahead and get us started, and then we'll go to Mike.
Well, I'm glad it's done, because it's a lot of work getting there, and it's really an interesting event to put on, because it's very rare that you put on an event that you don't control the event, right? That you normally, whatever event you're doing, you set up a convention, you know everything that's going to happen from beginning to end. Because of the nature of this event and being a simulated convention, we set it up so that we set the table, so to speak, and then once that table is set, we walk away. And it's up to the commissioners at the convention, those who are elected to be the president and the vice president convention, to run the convention. And so that's exactly what happened. They ran it. That makes it a little bit more stressful if you're somebody like us and me and Mike that are putting this event on and hosting that event, because we have no idea what's going to happen going in. And I would say overall, I was very pleased. I'll give kind of a general summary and then turn it over to Mike, and maybe we can do more detail. I think what I was most pleased about was there was a lot of rancor. There was a lot of division. There was a lot of intense debate. there were some heated arguments, I would say, in committee. People got upset with each other, angry with each other, like I think you would see in a real convention. People were debating complex issues that really mattered to them, so they were passionate about it. Stuff got discarded that some people were super passionate about. So I would say watching that whole process play out over a couple of days, and then having them be able to get together on 6 amendments to propose 6 amendments, I love that. I want to give one big caveat, and this is really important to me. I've heard a bunch of comments that people aren't happy with exactly what came out of convention. For example, they felt like term limits were too long. And I agree with that, by the way. But I want people to remember that this was a process practice, not a substance practice. In other words, I have no expectation that we're going to get a full package of amendments like we would get out of a normal convention, which would take months, that we're going to get that same thing in 2 days. And I've watched that play out over and over, where people would say, well, I'd love to do something like this, but it's too complicated. We're not going to be able to work that out in the next couple hours in committee. We got to move on to the next thing. So if you look at the package of amendments that came out and you feel like, well, it's not what I wanted, term limits are too long, or they didn't do term limits on bureaucrats, I agree with you on all that stuff. But again, remember, we were practicing process, not the end game substance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Well, I really agree with what Marcus said, and just kind of building on that, let's turn to the idea of putting term limits on bureaucrats. There was an overwhelming consensus that that was a good idea, but the details matter, and people didn't want to put out details of a process or of a proposed amendment on bureaucrats that would seem silly or dangerous, or would end up making us look like we don't know what we're doing, or making us look extremist or dangerous or something. Now, we probably could have passed something that no one named Fauci can serve longer than 15 minutes in the federal government. That probably could have passed. But the idea of, how does civil service work, and there were a variety of different things that were really important. And at the end of the day, people said, in light of the time constraint that we're under, if we could have passed a resolution that says a real convention should include term limits on bureaucrats, that would have passed unanimously. But to work out the actual language was just too difficult, and that was showing responsibility. So I think that one of the big take homes is that people who are in this situation will behave with responsibility. Even a limited situation, they're behaving with responsibility. Some of my favorites didn't make it very far, and some of my favorites weren't even introduced. But that doesn't matter in a simulated convention. The one thing, Mark, I will tell you, I just absolutely will do whatever I have to do to be a delegate at the real thing. And if I have to move 14 times, I will live in any state in the country. I don't care. I will buy a house. I will buy a farm. I'll do whatever it takes, because I want to be a delegate at this convention so bad. And I think it would be fun for me, and I think I would do good things for the country. Now, the other thing that this really showed me, and I think it's just verifies something I believed. Many of us, at least a few of us, are old enough to remember the Ollie North televised congressional hearings. And the general view of the country about Ollie North before those televised hearings was pretty split. They didn't know what to think about Ollie North. Some liked him, some didn't like him. And it's because everything had been filtered by the news media in a big way. And when the whole country got to listen to Ollie North for 6, 8, 10 hours, whatever it was, an extended period of time where he got to talk for himself, the country dramatically turned in favor of Ollie North. And the senators and congressmen that had been so mean to him the first day got a dose of their medicine from their constituents, and they flipped. And so what that says is that people will watch and people will learn, and they'll change their views. If people get to watch, for example, and they hear that, 90% plus of the treaties that are being adopted by this country are not being ratified by the Senate, people will be upset about that, and they want to. This will be the greatest grassroots education civic experience of all time. It will change the political views of the country. And some things that we would want to see happen that would not be politically viable today will be politically viable once people have watched this process and get to see for themselves what federal runaway looks like and what the problems with the debt are and what the problems with spending are and the problems with the Commerce Clause and so on. It will move the country in the right direction. And I think we have a really good chance of passing something good out of a convention and getting 38 states to ratify.
Yeah,
go ahead.
One more thing that nobody will have seen or will ever see, but I want people to know about. And this took place late on Thursday night. And there was a committee, an ad hoc committee that was formed on the first day called the Committee on Style. And what a Committee on Style is supposed to do is when you get proposed amendments, this is done in legislatures, you propose legislative language, the Committee on Style will review whatever's proposed, and they'll make sure that it's stylistically correct. And what that means really is punctuation, numbers are written correctly, things are spelled right, the grammar's right. It's very important that a Committee on Style not affect substance. It's so specific that they shouldn't even use synonyms. They can't replace words with another word just because they think the word sounds better, because words have particular meaning. So our Committee on Style met after dinner on Thursday night, and it was contentious in the Committee on Style. And I was in there, and Rita was in there. A bunch of our staff was around but not in there. Robert Kelly was in that meeting. The committee secretaries were in that meeting. So we'd had the day of all the committee debates. They had sent their amendments to the Committee on Style, and they were just supposed to be cleaning them up for floor debate the next day. And there were some heated debates that took place in there about whether things were substance or style. And the parliamentarian was pretty hot, and we had our vice chair was pretty hot. One of the committee chairs was pretty hot. And so there's a lot of intense debate going on. And it was honestly, for me, stressful. I wasn't engaged in any of the debate. I was just watching. We were really serious. We did not engage. Mike acted as a legal advisor, but we didn't tell people what they had to do or not had to do. We let them fight it out. And so it gets really intense in there. And I was pretty worried about it. And it was, in hindsight, it must have been what Franklin felt like when he called for prayer. Like the whole thing's falling apart. And I kind of felt a little bit like that. And then Jason Rapert, they kind of worked it out. And Jason Rapert, who's from Arkansas, said, you know, we need to cover this thing in prayer. And he prayed, and he prayed fervently, and he prayed passionately. And then the next person prayed, and the next person. I think there were 5 people who ultimately prayed over that particular meeting and over the convention in that moment. And it completely changed the tenor. And Rita and I were standing in the room. We'd walked in the room as this was starting. We stood there, praying along with these guys, and it completely changed. These guys who were kind of fighting it out and butting heads came together after that. They worked as brothers, working all this stuff out, went to convention floor. I went back to my room late that night after that, and I thought, okay, I could sleep now. It's going to be okay. And I would say that that feeling was there the next morning. The next morning, instead of opening with just a single prayer, the president of the convention Woody Jenkins had named 2 chaplains. So we had 3 people pray over the convention before the convention started. And I just felt like it set the right tone. Like they called out to God for his guidance, for the hand of providence to be on that convention. And I think the reason it worked is because they did that. And they definitely called God into that room.
Amen. It was an absolutely special moment to be a part of. I mean, the entire event in general was special, but being in that room at that time, it was something I'll never forget. And it really was an incredible event. So folks, if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I do encourage you, go to cossimulation2023.org and you can watch the entire live stream of that. And I know our dear friend producer G has lots of other content that's going to be coming out. So be sure to check out all of that. And I think you'll really enjoy it and learn something too about what this will actually look like. Okay, so now let's take a walk down memory lane and hear about Convention of States' origin story. And I think, Mike, it would be appropriate for you to start there. And then Mark, obviously you can chime in, but tell us, sir, how did Convention of States come to be?
Well, given my background of practicing constitutional law and teaching constitutional law, I taught at Patrick Henry College for a total of 17 years, and I taught high school kids constitutional law for another 10 or 15 years in addition to that. So about 30 years altogether teaching constitutional law. I recognize that we have two constitutions. We have the Constitution as written, and then we have the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court of the United States. And so what I tried to do in constitutional law classes was to teach both those things and say, here's what the Constitution originally meant, here's what the Supreme Court says it means today, compare and contrast, and then I would ask the question, well, so what do we do about it? You know, how do we fix it? Because I don't know of a single instance where the Constitution as written was improved upon by what the Supreme Court did in its interpretation. Now, some of them, they did no harm, but it was never improved upon. In most cases, it was the value or the meaning was diminished, was not as good as the original. And so I'm just the kind of person that if I know what a problem is, I want to find a solution to the problem. And so because of my knowledge of the text of the Constitution, I knew that Article 5 existed. And so I started writing about it on my Facebook page. And I went through, we'll call it a week. I don't remember, but I had several different lessons, one by one, where I point out a constitutional problem, and then I'd say, you know, we can solve this, but I wouldn't tell them what the solution was. And I'd compare the original Constitution with current interpretations, time after time. And on the last day, then I said, here's the solution. And I thought, I was so much a believer in the grassroots that if we just let the grassroots hear about this and they turn on their state legislators, that we could get the Convention of the States just by a pure grassroots movement with essentially almost no organization. That was pie in the sky. That party was pie in the sky. But nonetheless, one of the people that were reading my grassroots thing was Terry Dunn. And Terry Dunn was talking to her husband, and Tim was on Mark's board, and I'd known Tim and Terry from homeschool things from the past, and we arranged for Tim and Terry to come and visit my wife and I for a weekend at our cabin, and we talked about political things and what Citizens for Self-Governance was doing, and I pitched the idea of the Convention of the States. He was intrigued, and he wanted Mark to know about it. So I pitched the idea to Mark, and then the other board member was Eric, and I pitched the idea to Eric. And all of them, eventually, after some back and forth and deep conversations and good questions, everybody decided this is a good idea. And so at that point, they said, Mike, go create a battle plan. And so we were at a hotel in Scottsdale, Arizona, on Scottsdale Boulevard. I drive right to the spot, and they said, you know, go make a plan. And so I went back to my room for a couple of hours and came back with a plan, and they approved it, and away we went. And so that's Mark brought the leadership, brought the grassroots organizing, brought the vision for how to make my kind of more intellectual, if you will, academic, would be a better word. The academic side of the process needed a practical side of the process. And he brought the practical side of the process to the table and raised the money and did all the organizational stuff. And we made a great team together. I helped a little on the organizational stuff. He helped some on the academic stuff. But each of us had our, you know, somewhat our specialty. But we weren't potted plant on the other stuff either. We both could help each other on the other issues. And so we've been a team in spirit for 10 years. I did take a little time out to go run Alliance Defending Freedom for 6 years. But that's how we got going. And I think it's one of the most wonderful things I've ever been involved in my life.
So Mark, when Mike first brought it to you and to CSG, what were you thinking? I mean, had you heard about Article 5? Did you really trust in the process? What were your first thoughts on it?
Well, I think as God would have it, the year before I had helped co-hosted a conference at Harvard Law School on Article 5. And I had been invited to do it. I was interested in it, not so much because of Article 5 itself, but because there were people on the left and the right opposed. There were people on the left and the right in favor. And I thought it was unusual because that meant you were going to have an actual intellectual discussion, not an ideological argument. And so that appealed to me to have that discussion. So I had dug into Article 5 because of that conference a year before Mike started talking to me about this. My position when I first heard about it was completely neutral. It was kind of like, this seems pretty cool, but I don't know if you could really do it, and I'm busy. Was kind of my attitude. Those were in the Tea Party days, and I just thought, I don't know that I have time to do anything like this, but it's interesting. Once Mike brought it to me and introduced it to me as an operational plan, this was really the distinction. I'm a business person by training and by nature. I'm an entrepreneur. So it's one thing to bring me an idea and say, well, I have this cool idea that we could call an Article 5 convention. And this is where I think what Mike is saying is so true, that we cross over back and forth in our disciplines. I mean, he has absolute massive expertise academically that I don't have, but we've also both run stuff. We both have political experience. We understand the politics and the messaging of things. So there's a lot of ability to go back and forth. So when he brought me an operational plan and said, look, I'm not just giving you an idea, I'm showing you how this can be done. I'm giving you a structure. I'm showing you how you break this according to state legislative district. I'm showing you how many people I think you need in every district, and what would the structure look like of an organization in a grassroots sense, right? Mike's unusual in that he understands grassroots. You don't find many academics, I would say, that understand grassroots, many what I would describe as scholars, professors. You don't find, frankly, many politicians. Mike's run for office, ran for lieutenant governor. You don't find many people with that experience that, in my opinion, really understand grassroots. So Mike presented me with an actual operational grassroots plan, and that's what sold me. It's like, I get the concept, but Mike showed me it could actually be done. And I think it's important if you're going to work with somebody that you look at their background. And one of the things that I saw in Mike's background was that he had led the homeschool movement in America. And this is doing something that I would describe, if you look at it in hindsight, you could have said it was impossible at the time. When you think parents have a fundamental right to educate their own kids, most of us take that for granted now. That wasn't true when Mike started this movement. When Mike started the movement, there were no cell phones, there was no internet. And so what that means is, how do you organize a national grassroots movement? It becomes a colossal question. The fax machine was high tech, right? And so that's a lot of what he used was a fax machine and regular phones. So I looked at Mike's record and I said, well, here's a guy that knows how to build a nationwide movement to do something that other people might say is impossible, but he's done that. And so I had a lot of faith in him. And there was another thing that was said to me that was at least as important as all of this stuff. For me, relationship really matters. God makes us to be in relationship with other people. And Jonathan, you know me really well. You know how I feel about that. And Tim Dunn said to me, hey, you need to meet Mike Farris. He has this idea about Article 5. I think you're really going to like it. And you guys are going to be great friends. And that's something that always piques my interest because I love that. I mean, if I'm a collector, I collect friends. That's what I love, relationships. And that's proven to be as true as anything else that Tim ever said to me. Mike and I become like brothers. I mean, if I hear, if he's in a firefight, I'm going to always come running in that firefight, and there's nobody I'd rather have back my play in a firefight. And that's part of the strength of Convention of States is you've got two brothers and now millions of others who've locked arms, who've literally pledged lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. And it started from literally just the two of us on the phone deciding we were going to do that.
Just incredible, absolutely incredible. And I love to hear that story and learn about exactly how it came about. Just an incredible act of providence, I think, to bring all of this together and for us to have this movement and now to be here 10 years later. Now, all right, I'm going to put you guys to the test, but we're going to have a little bit of fun here, okay? I'm going to actually make you kind of go through a little bit of a mental exercise here. It's been 10 years, and Mike, I know you'd stepped away for a little bit, but over the course of the 10 years, we've had a lot of incredible moments, some highs, some lows, but if you could boil it all down to a favorite moment, what would it be? And I'll give you, not my favorite moment, but I'll give you one of my own. personal favorite of mine, if not the favorite, was being in New Jersey in 2014, first being exposed to Convention of States by seeing Mike debate Andy Schlafly of Eagle Forum. We don't do debates anymore, but we did early on, and that debate was just incredible, and that cinched it for me, and that's why I signed up to become a district captain, and here I am. But what about you two gentlemen? So Mark, we'll go with you first, and then we'll go over to Mike.
Okay, I got to comment on that debate because I was in the room and I was super early on, and the first time I'd seen Mike on stage like that. And first of all, I mean, he whipped Andy Schlafly something fierce. But something happened in that debate, which has been a hallmark of our fight with folks on the right who are opposed to us ever since, which is, I'm going to say this as nicely as I can, but it won't be very nice, which is Schlafly behaved in a completely disreputable, despicable way at that debate. And I felt like having that Joe Wilson moment. I wanted to yell out, "You lie," in the middle of the debate. I was so furious. And the thing that made me so furious is Andy has known, or Mike, I should say, Mike has known Andy since he was very young, and used to work with Phil Schlafly. And Andy went after Mike's character, and he couldn't win the argument on Convention of States. So he started throwing spurious claims around about dark money and nefarious influences. And I think I would have to say Mike's probably been a hero in his life for many years and somebody you really look up to. And it showed how desperate people behave when they're losing the argument. So it was infuriating for me, but I would say in hindsight, it showed me it was prophetic, because this is how most of our opponents operate, is they disparage us, they smear us, they can't win the factual arguments, they can't win the logical arguments. So that moment is kind of burned into my brain as like, that's the first time I saw what our opposition would look like. So if I had to choose one like moment, man, that's so hard, Jonathan, because there's so many. I'm gonna say something that was pretty recent, because I feel like, you know, these moments keep happening and they're going to keep happening. When we had our summit, at the summit, there was a moment when we announced that Mike Farris was coming back to the organization. And the feeling in the room was just extraordinary. And it was something that honestly, I didn't expect this to happen. You know, I never, when Mike felt called by God to go lead ADF, and that was really hard for me because I love Mike. I love working with Mike. Losing your partner like that is never easy. People ask, "Oh, well, did you guys have a falling out?" No way, not even a little bit. I remember Mike calling me and saying, "Look, I got, you know, people came to me. They're offering me this job," and he said, "You know, I'm praying about it." And I said, "Look, if you feel called by God, you should go do it." And he said, "Well, I'm not going to do it without your blessing." Incredible, you know, act of friendship and loyalty, in my opinion, honor. And so to have him come back after that, and that moment where we got to say he was coming back, and then we gave him an award at the end of the summit, our Lifetime Achievement Award, and having him up on stage. I've watched that video. I look at those pictures over and over again. It was like, I want to say it was the culmination of a dream, but I never dreamed it. And it was just an extraordinary turn of events that I'm so happy to have him back. It's such a pinnacle experience for me in that moment. I've seen some of the photographs of it. Mike, I remember you sitting at at your table as everybody was applauding. It's like a movie. I can picture you sitting there, just like the spotlight on you, everybody around you. It literally was like the climactic scene of a movie. So for me, that's one of the highlights of all of my time in Convention of States.
Well, that's both those things are incredibly humbling, and I'm grateful for your friendship, your love, and for your kind words. The thing that came to mind was being in the Georgia legislature when they passed the Convention of States. And that's, you know, getting the first state to do it. It was a signal to me, this is real, we're underway, this is going to happen. And that gave me so much encouragement. There have been many other things along the way. You know, had special times in Oklahoma, just, you know, a lot of different things. I got a kick out of being in New Hampshire this year when I was able to testify in the committee, and I got Democrat votes in the committee in New Hampshire. That was, and we passed committee. I liked that. That was encouragement. This year in the Iowa legislature, I had the Democrats on the committee actually ask me Democrat questions against the Convention of States rather than John Birch questions for the first time. It was good to have some opposition that was it was philosophically valid. They like big government. They like big spending. They like these things, and they were going after us on those bases. Okay, fine, let's have it out. And so those are some of the other soft moments. But that Georgia moment will always be very special to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to throw out another one, which is, and this goes way back to the beginning. Mike Farris and I both had pre-existing relationships with Mark Levin, separate relationships. And Mike had lived for a long time very nearby Mark and knew him well from the political movement, but also from just, occasionally eating at a local restaurant where he eats breakfast or ate breakfast every day for years. So there was this crossover, and I knew Mark from the Tea Party movement. So Mark wrote the Liberty Amendments, a book which is really the philosophical foundation, the foundational piece for Convention of States. If you want to know why we need to call a Convention of States, if you want to know what we can do in a Convention of States, the best book ever written on it is Liberty Amendments. And so it's the companion piece, right? You should read it. If you're a Convention of States fan, or if you don't know whether you're a fan or not, you read Mark Levin's Liberty Amendments, you'll know what you need to know. And so we launched the Convention of States project the same week that Liberty Amendments was released. So it seems like Mark writes a book about Article 5, we launch a movement about Article 5. Obviously that's coordinated, except it wasn't coordinated at all. And the way I discovered this, and some of you heard the story, I was serving on serving on a panel at an event hosted by Hugh Hewitt, who I would describe as a former conservative talk show host. And it was in Tucson, Arizona. And Levin, unbeknownst to me, was going to Skype into the panel. And each of us who were the panelists talking about the Constitution got to ask Mark a question. Mark had been opposed to the use of Article 5 in the past. But I thought, I've got nothing to lose. I'm going to ask Mark what he thinks of the use of Article 5 now. And I thought if I could get him on our side, that would be huge for Convention of States. Mike and I had already decided to do this. We're forming a project, we're hiring people, we're getting ready to launch. And I asked Mark what he thought of it. And I said, we've lost our government, it's out of control. I think the only way we can get it back is to use Article 5, call a convention, and propose amendments to the Constitution. And Mark's response, I'll never forget, the closest I can get to quoting him, I'll do my best, was, I'm writing a book and I can't really talk about it, but I agree with you. That was his entire answer. And I thought, Mark Levin's never at a loss for words. That's the weirdest Levin answer. He didn't yell, he didn't monologue, it was just nothing. And I thought, that's so weird, I don't understand that. And then it went to the next person to ask a question, and I had my phone sitting in front of me on the table up on the dais, and it buzzed, and it was Levin texting me while he's getting the next question. And he says, we need to talk, call me as soon as you're done. So the thing wraps up, I go out to the foyer, I call him, and he's screaming at me like it is a Levin tirade, the full, you idiot kind of tirade. And I can't figure out what he's so mad about. And he's saying, you could have cost me my contract, you could breach my contract, how dare you, why do you? And I have no idea what he's talking about. I finally interrupt him, and he says, what do you mean you don't know what I'm talking about? It's my book. And I said, I don't know about your book. You know, in hindsight, I said, well, I knew he was writing a book because he was extra cranky, but I didn't really know what his book was about. And he said, I'm writing a book called The Liberty Amendments about using Article 5 to call a convention of states. You didn't know that? And I said, no, like you never tell me what your books are about. I knew you're writing a book, but I don't know what. And he said, that's not coincidence, that's providence. And he was so excited that Mike and I were launching the project because he said, I'm a writer, I'm a talker, I'm not an activist, I'm not a political guy, I don't know how to organize this. My greatest fear is I was going to write this book and nobody would do anything about it. So that's how Mark ends up being what I would describe as kind of writing the intellectual foundation for the Article 5 movement. And I love the fact that Mark called out that the hand of providence was on this, because that's not a coincidence. That's way too much to be a coincidence.
Amen. And I remember back at the very beginning, so many people, when you asked how they heard about Convention of States, it was Mark Levin. Not so much as nowadays, because there have been so many different things. But when we first got started, it was the Liberty Amendments that led so many people to us. Okay, so if you don't mind indulging me here just for a moment, gentlemen, over the years, obviously, we have seen so many great people come and go within our movement. There have been some incredible patriots that have left this earth, among those being the great Dr. Tom Coburn. And there have been many others that have also moved on for one reason or another. I think, though, when history tells the story of Convention of States, their contributions to our success will be inescapable. So I just wanted to take a moment to tip a cap to all of those who have come and gone, especially Dr. Tom, who has meant so much to us, and thank everyone for all of their contributions. I don't know if either one of you want to say a quick word about that.
Mike?
Well, I remember going to Senator Coburn's office with Mark to have our first conversation about this. We knew that he had a lot of influence, he had a lot of savvy. I was blown away by the response because not only did he listen to us, he was on board as a fighter. And to have his help just took us to another level of credibility, and credibility and visibility that helped so much. And he was such an encouragement to both of us personally, spiritually, politically, every way you could be encouraged. Tom Coburn encouraged us. So the Tom Coburn stories will never cease because there's so many and they're of such great value.
Yeah, for me, Tom became an incredible mentor in my life. The last 5 years of his life were spent working for Convention of States. It's still, to me, to say Tom Coburn worked for us, that's overwhelming. I feel more like, if anything, I work for Tom Coburn because I'm such a junior compared to that guy. Always will be. And he was a great statesman in an era when there aren't many great statesmen and stateswomen. He was a man who always stood on principle. And he was unusual in Washington, D.C. because he was willing to stand on principle to his own political detriment. And that's highly unusual. He was not in it for himself. He was not in it to get reelected. He was not in it to become a committee chair or be powerful. He was in it to do what he believed was right. And there's a couple of quintessential Coburn stories that I remember. One is sitting in a legislator's office and having a legislator say to him, well, I have people in my district that really don't like this, and you wouldn't do something that your constituents don't like, would you? And Tom Coburn said, every single day. He said, if you're a leader, then you get elected to exercise leadership. And if you believe that what you are doing is right, and it's different than what your constituents want, you have an obligation as a leader to explain to them why you're doing what you're doing. You don't have an obligation to do what they want you to do every day. It's not a direct democracy. They elected you for your integrity and your intelligence and your discretion and your wisdom, hopefully. And so he said, I'm going to exercise that. And he said, he told this legislator, one of the greatest honors I could possibly have is to be removed from office by my constituents for doing that which I believed is right, because it shows I have integrity. I'm going to stand for what I believe, no matter the political consequence. So that was the kind of man that Tom Coburn was. And you don't meet a lot of people like that in politics. So to be able to walk by his side and to learn from him for the last 5 years of his life was extraordinary. And for those of you who didn't know Tom, get the chance to know him like we did, that's a guy who died with his boots on. I mean, he literally said to Patty at one point, my wife, who helped put him on the road for fundraising stuff, that he intended to die with his boots on. He didn't want to have it taken easy on him when things were rough in the end. I remember one of the last interviews was at our summit, and I asked him a question on stage. We both knew he was nearing the end, and I asked him, with everything that's going on, the way you feel, I know you're hurting, all this chemo, and you had really bad cancer. Why do you keep fighting? And he looked at me, and you probably wouldn't know it. People who are watching wouldn't know it because they weren't looking into his eyes like I was. And he looked at me like, you idiot. Why are you even asking me that question? And his response was intense for me. I had to end the interview at that point. He said, what else would I do? Why do you keep fighting? What else would I do? And that's something that I will never forget. And it sticks with me. Like, what else are we going to do? The only thing we have to do is we're going to keep fighting.
And we have to keep fighting. We have to keep fighting. Dr. Tom showed us the way. Okay, so we've got a ton of great questions from the audience, and we'll get to those in just a minute. And for those of you who are used to Convention of States at Home webinars, we usually end them about 45 minutes. We're going to go a little bit longer here this evening to answer the questions because this is a special occasion. This is the 10th anniversary, so we want to be able to answer some of the great questions that we have here. But my last question for both of you is, obviously, we've talked about the 10 years and so many different amazing memories, but where do we go in the future? What do things look like over the next 10 years and beyond, or perhaps starting a little bit smaller? What does it look like in 2024? Mike, if you don't mind going first, and then Mark.
Well, we've got two basic phases ahead of us. One is we need to clean up and get the clearly conservative states on board unanimously, all of them. And so that's going to be a priority for us in the next year or two. And I'm trusting and believing that the lies and the misinformation and all that is going to go away because it's not honoring, it's not God honoring, and it's a lot of people profess to be Christians that are doing these things, and I don't believe that that can be sustained. I don't think God will allow that to continue. So I think we'll get these deep red states that are, a handful of holdouts. We'll get them, and then we need to start picking off states in a second group that can be flipped. There's some of them are red right now, some of them are blue, some of them are purple, but we're not going to be going for the deep blue states, the Massachusetts, the New York, the California. That's not a realistic plan. But I believe that we can get to 34 and start flipping states. And so we have the time, the resources to do 6, 8, 9, 10 states a year, perhaps, depending on size and other factors, and giving and other things. And so I think that we can see in the next 2 to 3 years, I think we're going to be getting in the 30s. And so when we're there, Katie bar the door, the long knives are going to come out, and that's okay because it will be a separation between those who hate the Constitution and those who love the Constitution. Give me that fight every day, all day long. I think we can get to 34 states when the battle is, do you love the Constitution or not?
Hey, Jonathan, I want to jump in and talk about the blue states, the real blue states. And this is important to me. I spend a lot of time on the blue states. I was on a call with our Connecticut team on Saturday, and I did last year or early in the year, I did an Eastern Seaboard tour. I want to do another one of those. And so I want people to understand, if you're in one of those states, or a really blue state like California, or maybe Illinois, you're not off the table for us. I had somebody ask me, well, does Vermont really matter? Does Hawaii really matter? They're hard as far as getting to a convention of states. You got very blue legislatures. And unequivocally, the answer is they matter a lot on multiple levels. And I want people to understand this. Number one, nothing's impossible, right? I'm just going to say that over and over. I believe God's in this, and I also think that we're going to get to a point where, as we move towards 34, you might see some blue states that just say, hey, we want to be in the game. This thing's going to happen. We want to be in the game as it happens. We don't want to be behind the curve. You might see some blue states join because of that. We are seeing some blue state legislators come along, and we've had some sponsorship. We've seen in some of the red states, some Democrats vote with us. I think as this fight becomes more and more clear, we're going to see more and more Democrats come along with us. So one, I'm not going to give up on any state. Number two is they have a very important role to play. This is a unique movement because we have to work in all 50 states. You're working in your individual state, but whether you're working in Hawaii or California or Washington or Illinois or New York or any other place we might consider a blue state, you have an effect on the rest of the nation. Whether North Carolina passes, is dependent on what happens in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. And the reason I say that, and I don't want you guys to discount yourselves, is when you do incredible things, for example, on the Eastern Seaboard, which we got a lot of states doing amazing, Illinois doing amazing stuff. Like I said, I was just with the Connecticut team. They're doing a lot of great stuff. Vermont, these smaller states, New Hampshire, Hawaii is an incredible grassroots team. When they do great stuff, other states, like red states, look at them and say, well, how come Illinois has the most active district captains? Like, aren't they a blue state? And what it allows me and Mike to do is say to red states, oh yeah, it's so hard for you. Look at Illinois, or look at Connecticut, or look at New Jersey and what they're doing, and learn from them. And so I want you to understand that you are providing leadership for the rest of the country. There are great programs coming out of, again, I'm going to bring up Illinois, great state leader there in David Winters, coming up with great programs that then get adopted in other states. One last expansion I want to give to that beyond the blue states is we have states that we refer to as the pass states. Jonathan's region, Jonathan works in the pass states region, and those are really important too. They're not done just because you passed. In the beginning, we kind of treated them like they were done. Georgia, when it passed, we're like, oh, it passed. What do we do now? Like, we had no idea what to do with our grassroots. Now, in past states, the grassroots are working on pro-life issues and pro-Second Amendment issues and property tax reform issues and election integrity issues. And they're working as election judges and poll workers, and they're running for office, and they're taking over school boards. And so Convention of States over the last 10 years has become much more than just an organization working to pass the Convention of States. So whether you're in a blue state or a pass state, you matter, and what you do matters. And so I want you to remember, wherever you are on the playing board, whether you're Georgia passed first or Florida second, or you're a blue state and you think, well, I don't know how we're ever going to get past our legislator, everything you're doing there matters an awful lot.
I like Mark's answer better than my answer. And let me embellish on that just a little bit. I just finished recording a civics curriculum for high school kids. And one of the things that I go through in the state legislative elections is the average state legislative election in off years is voted on by an incredibly small number of people in the state. Some states it's as small as 13, 14%. Other states it's 40%. But there is a huge number of people that are our kind of people, and we can win any state with this formula. If all of our people turn out and the other sides turn out the same way they historically have done, we would control the legislature in every single state. And so, to change a biblical message a little bit, we have not because we ask not. We have not because we vote not, would be the twist on that. And so if our people will turn out, there is no state that is impossible, especially, I grew up in Washington State, and my original law practice was there, so on. And people think that's not doable. No, it's doable. It is. Washington State has never been on my undoable list because it was like 5 or 6 years ago. The Republicans had control of the Senate. Seattle and environs is a really tough area. The rest of the state is much, much better for conservative issues. And so, in Washington State, like many states, it's getting the suburban and rural people to gang together and say, do not let the cities run everything down your throat. See how bad the cities are going? And I think to some degree, the cities have outpunted their coverage. And people are upset about the stuff that's going on in Seattle, that's going on in Portland, that's going on in downtown San Francisco. And I think that the people that might have split their votes in the rural area 20 years ago, they're going to say, not anymore. We're going to vote against what's going on in these crazy places. And that kind of thinking will feed our movement, and that kind of thinking will put every place on the table.
Yep. Well said. Well said. And folks, if you are interested in joining the Convention of States family, now is a great time to get involved and help move the movement forward in your state. So please go to conventionofstates.com, click on that Take Action tab, sign up to become a volunteer. And if you're willing and you've got some extra time and you're willing to be a leader in your legislative district, I encourage you to sign up to become a district captain. Those are our leaders that will focus on building relationships with legislators, as well as reaching, teaching, and activate community activists and volunteers within that district. So we really rely on our district captains. They're the tip of the spear. So please go to conventionofstates.com, click on the Take Action tab, sign up to become a volunteer. Okay, before I get into the questions from the audience, I did want to just let everyone know that, I teased earlier that we have our guest lined up for the September COS at Home webinar. And I wanted to reveal to you that the guest is going to be none other than Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation. Really looking forward to sitting down with Kevin and talking about his support for Convention of States and the fact that we had a number of people from the Heritage Foundation actually attend the simulation and serve as commissioners. So it'll be a great conversation. That's going to be on Wednesday, September 6th at 8 o'clock Eastern time, the usual time for our COS at Home webinars. We're dropping the link in the chat now for you to go ahead and register. Okay, so let's dive into some of these great questions that we've gotten here tonight, and I'll assign one to each of you, and so this way we can try and get through these. So Laura asks, how can we best leverage the mock simulation to influence our state legislatures, especially in blue states? Mike, I'll turn that one over to you.
Well, I think the person should go in and look at various parts of it and pick something that they think would be of interest, a 5, 10, 12-minute segment, bite-sized, and send that segment to the legislator you want to influence with a short explanation. I think that you'd be of interest, this might be of interest to you. So give them a bite-sized thing, and then if they're interested, you'll tell me. If you want to see more, then here's how you get more. But introducing bite-sized components to people will be very important.
Excellent. So Mark, this one for you from Randy. What is the current COS status in North Carolina? And earlier we also kind of joked, we said there are 19, kind of 20 states. You want to tell us what's going on in that 20th state? That's Kansas. So can you tell us about North Carolina and Kansas?
In North Carolina, very frustrating to me right now. The legislature is stalled out. We've passed the House. We're pending in the Senate. I think we have the votes in the Senate. We're very close if we don't have the votes. But they've stalled out over the budget and really just kind of completely reached a budget impasse to the point where the legislature has now recessed, and we don't know when they're coming back. It won't be at least until the end of August. So we're just sitting there waiting. And this is one of the things that's been really hard for me to learn about the legislative process. It's not always about you, kind of like everything in life, right? You want it to be about you, but it's not about you. And so in this case, we've got this budget impasse, and we can't do anything. What our grassroots are doing, I think, is really important, and folks should remember this. They're writing letters to our supportive senators and asking them to move it forward when they come back in. And the important part of that is they're handwriting letters, not emails, not text messages. They're actually handwriting letters in envelopes, and each legislator, this is for our supporters, they're getting dozens of these. And those letters have a lot of meaning when they get handwritten letters. I've had legislators come up to me with pocketfuls of letters telling me how much impact that had on them. So that's what we're doing right now in North Carolina. We're just stalled and waiting right now. I'm going to let Mike address Kansas a little more, but I'll tell you briefly, Kansas has a 2/3 requirement in their state constitution. And what that says is the legislature has to have a 2/3 majority vote to pass an Article 5 application. Well, that's unconstitutional because of the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution. You can't put additional requirements on calling an Article 5 convention. The state constitution can't override the federal constitution. So we got a majority vote there. We didn't quite get to the 2/3 level in both houses. So now probably the way this is going to have to go is the way of litigation, and I'll let Mike as the litigator discuss this.
Well, the Attorney General of Kansas in 2019 wrote an opinion that basically acknowledges what Mark just said, and that is any attempt by the legislature or by the state constitutional process of changing the rules for Article 5 is unconstitutional. The reason that is that the state constitution controls what the state government does about state government. But Article 5, the state legislators receive their power directly from Article 5. And state laws can't change the U.S. Constitution. It's as simple as that. And there are court cases on this. There's an Attorney General opinion on this. The only thing that is any bit of a problem and that is if the legislature wants to impose a 2/3 majority rule on itself as a matter of its own legislative rule, they can do that. But there is the Senate in Kansas has no such rule. The House kind of has the rule, but the key thing is that, and this is getting a little technical, but the rules require that if they think the 2/3 majority is applicable, that language has to go into the preamble of the measure, and they didn't put it in, and so both houses voted on a measure that didn't put the 2/3 rule in, and so basically, if the Kansas legislature is the judge of whether the 2/3 rule applies or not, they've decided it doesn't apply because they didn't put it in as their own rule explicitly requires. And so that's what we'll be litigating. This is not slam dunk kind of litigation because there is some squirrely stuff in the legislative rules. But I like our side better than I like the other side's chances on this. And we're hopeful that this will get worked out quickly. And it's not the kind of thing that will take years to litigate. This will take months to litigate. And I think that we're in good shape.
Excellent, excellent. Mike, I'm going to come back to you with this question from Mike. If the COS or if the convention gets to a convention and we have these amendments that are put forth and added to the Constitution, he asks, why would anyone believe that Congress would follow these amendments? They already ignore many laws that they don't like.
Well, Congress has the problems with most of the disobedience to the original Constitution is the original Constitution. It's the Commerce Clause, the General Welfare Clause, the Treaty Clause, the Article 1, Section 1 that says only Congress can make rules. You change, those are 99% of what's wrong with Congress is in those four things. The amendments, they follow the amendments pretty well. The 17th Amendment says states legislatures don't appoint congressmen, senators anymore. We follow that. The 16th Amendment says you can tax the people directly for income tax. We follow that. The 19th Amendment says women can vote. We follow that. The 15th Amendment says black people can vote. We follow that. We follow the amendments a whole lot better than we follow the original Constitution. And so that's true. And the Supreme Court is not going to change. The problem would be in kind of academic theory. 50 years from now, will the Supreme Court still interpret the amendments correctly that we write today? Well, okay. I mean, if we do a good enough job, they will. But that's the threat that's on the horizon. And if we, by 50 years of improvement, we'll be moving America in the right direction for 50 years. And so I think it would, it should last even longer than that if we do things correctly. So, those are some of my answers. And, I am all about believing that the founders believed that the best way to protect freedom is right structure. And we need to have right structure here to change the balance of power.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing, and this is important. Why are amendments followed? Why is that true? What Mike said is absolutely factually true. It's not pixie dust. It's not because they're magic. It's because this is the single most muscular act of political activity that could happen in the United States of America. There's nothing else that requires 2/3 of legislatures just to have a discussion. There's nothing that requires 3/4 of legislatures in the country to agree before you actually get an amendment. So what that means is the vast majority of America believes we should do something, is in favor of doing this thing, and politicians in the courts are not that brave. I mean, they would follow. That's not American political wind. That's an American political hurricane. And so when they put their finger in the air, it's going to be very clear which way the wind is blowing. That's why we tend to follow amendments, and we follow them for a long period of time. Will we drift away? I think that's human nature. Yeah, of course, over time, people like power, they drift away from things that restrict their power. But our job is to constantly course correct. I mean, Reagan said that every generation has its own fight for liberty, right? To keep that torch from going out. This is our generation's fight, and we can protect the next 5 or 6 generations by putting this right They might have that fight again in 50 or 100 years, but we got to put it right for right now.
Well said. Well said. Okay, I see we're at the top of the hour. We're going to squeeze in 2 more questions here. Mark from Sandy, why aren't there any more debates? Should there be some to help more people learn? Why does Convention of States no longer engage in debates?
Yeah, look, I think it's important. I get this all the time. I can't even tell you the number. I wish I had a quarter for every time somebody tells me, not only do they want to debate me, but I must debate them, right? It's every state, it's every opponent. They all have the exact same arguments. There's a reason we don't debate. We've already done the debates. If you want to see Mike Farris debate the John Birch Society, he's done that. That's on video. It's on our website. If you want to see Mike Farris debate Eagle Forum, he debated their top lawyer, Andy Schlafly. You described that. That was 10 years ago. We've done that debate. We're not just going to repeat the debates over and over. I get this request from a guy from the John Birch Society all the time, and I get told, well, he really wants to debate you. And my response is, I understand he really does. That's not my job. It's not to please the John Birch Society or anybody else. Our job is to educate the American public. The debates are out there if people want to see them. We've also got scholarly papers by Rob Natelson refuting every single argument, for example, that the John Birch Society has ever raised. It's an unimaginably difficult task. It's like playing whack-a-mole because they're so dishonest and so uneducated on the subject. But we can't waste our time continuing to debate everybody that wants to debate us. So the debates are done. They're on record. If folks want to see them, they're there and they can watch them.
There you go.
I will make an offer of 3 exceptions. I'll debate any of the following 3 people: Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Dr. Fauci. Any of those want to debate, I'm in.
Sign me up for that. I want to be at that one. All right. So the last question, we'll turn over to you, Mike. And this one comes from Fred. He's asking you to take out your crystal ball and say, he asks, what is the realistic target date for us to get to 34 states to call this convention?
I am as a Baptist, and so I don't, we're not allowed to have the gift of prophecy because it leads to dancing and beer. And I've run nonprofit organizations for over 40 years, so I'm not a profit guy. So with that said, I think that it will be before I get to be 80, and I'm 72 in a couple of weeks here, and so it's going to be before I get to be 80 years old. I've got my first great grandchild coming at Christmas time, and I am not going to have a great grandchild in college when this stuff is still going on. We're gonna get it done before then, and so that's as close as I feel like getting.
Yeah, and so I want to add sort of a nuance to this question, Jonathan. We get the question all the time. Well, why is it taking so long? And so I want to say first, I don't know, and it's frustrating as heck. I want it to be done too. Trust me, I'd like to relax a little bit instead of traveling all over the country all the time. But the real reason, all kidding aside, is that the framers intended it for it to take a long time. Look, they set the highest bar in our entire system of governance. That's not a mistake. They knew what they were doing. It was very thoughtful. They did not want it to be easy for us to amend the Constitution. Washington says on his farewell address that we shouldn't amend the Constitution by measures of accretion, but only by using the appropriate process. What he meant by that is don't let the government just do it by changing the laws and changing the fundamental premises of our Constitution. Use the right processes, and those processes require that you develop nationwide support, millions of people over a number of years, so that we don't get a bunch of crazy stuff like, say, gender ideology in our Constitution. They didn't want it to be easy. So I can tell you it's hard. It's supposed to be hard, and along the way, it allows us to build the largest grassroots army in American history, doing all those other things I talked about. So I'm going to, a shameless promotion here, which is, if you love Convention of States and you want to help us, join our monthly donor program. It's $1 a day, it's $31 a month, and there'll be an email going out tomorrow about how you can join. We need you. This is not an organization that runs on some wealthy guy somewhere off, some industrialist running Convention of States by giving us $10 million a year. It's you. It's people like you that support the organization that make it happen. So again, we have a monthly donor program, $1 a day. If you buy a latte every day, you're spending a lot more than that. So take a buck off that, remove the flavoring or something, bring your own flavoring, and $1 a day to our monthly donor program would be really appreciated.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important, like you were just saying, Mark, to remember that Convention of States, it's in the name, but we're more than a convention, right? And that's why it's taking a while, but it's important that it take a while because we need to restore that culture of self-governance back to our society in order for anything that comes out of a convention to truly take hold and really make a difference. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Folks, thank you for taking the time out to join us. If you've been asking questions, we've tried to answer as many as we can. We will try to answer them afterwards. We've got your questions. We'll try to email you some answers to your questions. The number one question that we do get, though, is, was this recorded? The answer is yes, and we will happily provide you with a recording after the conclusion of this webinar. And once it processes, an email will be sent out to all of you. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you relate, we got you. Don't worry about it. Mike, Mark, thank you both so incredibly much for being here. Thank you for founding this and for bringing all of these incredible patriots together to utilize exactly what our founders wanted us to do. They gave us Article 5 for a time like this. And now, thanks to both of you, we have the opportunity to take it and really deliver and save our country for our kids, our grandkids, and posterity. So thank you both so much for everything that you have done and all of the sacrifices that you have made for this movement.
Thanks, everyone. God bless you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. God bless.